When the HOA slapped a gate across the only road to Daniel Harper's cabin, they thought they'd locked him out for good, smug in their control over the secluded mountain community. Little did they know, Daniel held the deed to the only bridge leading into their entire neighborhood, a secret that would turn their power play into a lesson they'd never forget. Daniel Harper had always valued his privacy. At 42, he'd spent years building a quiet life in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, far from the noise of Charlotte, where he ran a small but successful construction company. His cabin, tucked away on a 10-acre plot at the edge of the Pinewood Estates community, was his sanctuary. He'd bought the land in 2015, drawn to its isolation, accessible only by a narrow, winding road that crossed a single stone bridge over the Elk River. The bridge, built in the 1930s, was sturdy but unassuming, and most residents of Pinewood Estates never gave a second thought. Daniel, however, knew its importance and its ownership better than anyone. The trouble started in the spring of 2023. Pinewood Estates was a gated community, home to a mix of retirees, wealthy weekenders, and a few year-round residents like Daniel. The Homeowners Association, led by a retired banker named Richard Callahan, had a reputation for being overzealous. They enforced strict rules: no loud music, no unapproved paint colors, no unregistered vehicles parked overnight. Daniel, who kept himself and maintained his property meticulously, had never had an issue with the HOA. That is, until they decided to tighten their grip on the community's access road. Daniel first heard about the gate in March, during a rare HOA meeting he attended out of curiosity. Callahan stood at the front of the community center, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, explaining the board's latest decision. To enhance security and protect property values, he said, "We'll be installing a gate at the entrance to Pinewood Estates. Only residents with valid key cards will be granted access." The room buzzed with approval from most attendees, who saw it as a way to keep out trespassers and riffraff. Daniel, however, felt a knot form in his stomach. The only road into Pinewood Estates ran through his property, specifically over the bridge he owned. He raised his hand. "What about the bridge?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "The road crosses private property before it reaches the community. Have you secured permission from the landowner?" Callahan's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "The road is public access," he said dismissively. "It's been used by residents for decades. We consulted our legal team, and there's no issue." Daniel didn't press the issue in front of the crowd. He knew better than to tip his hand. The truth was, he'd purchased the bridge along with his land, a detail buried in the fine print of his deed. The previous owner, an eccentric old man named Walter Grayson, had made sure to emphasize it during the sale. "That bridge is yours," Walter had said, pointing to the weathered stone structure. "Own it, and you own the key to this whole valley." At the time, Daniel had thought it was just a quirky selling point. Now, it was starting to feel like a trump card. The gate went up in April, a sleek metal barrier with a keypad and a camera, cutting off the road just beyond the bridge. Daniel noticed it on his way to the cabin one weekend, his truck slowing as he approached the new obstruction. A sign next to the gate read, "Pinewood Estates residents only. Present key card for entry." He didn't have a key card. He hadn't been issued one, despite being a dues-paying member of the HOA. Irritated, he parked his truck and walked to the gate, peering through the bars. The road stretched on toward the community, his cabin just a mile beyond. He called the HOA office, but no one answered. It was a Saturday, and the office was closed. By Monday, Daniel had left 3 voicemails and sent 2 emails, all unanswered. He drove to the HOA office in person, a small building at the edge of the community, and found Callahan sitting behind a desk, reviewing paperwork. "Mr. Harper," Callahan said, barely looking up, "what can I do for you?" "I need a key card for the gate," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm. "I can't get to my cabin without it." Callahan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "We're still processing the key cards," he said. "There's been a delay. You'll get yours soon." "How soon?" Daniel asked. "I'm locked out of my own property." Callahan's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's a community security measure, Mr. Harper. I'm sure you understand. We'll get it sorted." Daniel left the office, his frustration mounting. He didn't trust Callahan's assurances. There was something off about the man's tone, a hint of condescension that set Daniel's teeth on edge. Over the next week, he called again, emailed again, and even sent a certified letter requesting access. Each time, he was met with excuses. The system wasn't fully operational. The key cards were still being programmed. The board needed to approve new members. It was clear the HOA was stalling, but Daniel couldn't figure out why. He started asking around, talking to neighbors he'd rarely spoken to before. Most were sympathetic but unhelpful, repeating the HOA's line about security and property values. One neighbor, an older woman named Margaret who'd lived in Pinewood Estates for 20 years, was more forthcoming. Over coffee at her kitchen table, she lowered her voice and said, "It's about control. Callahan and the board want a side who comes and goes. They don't like people like you, folks who keep to themselves, who don't kiss up to them." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean, people like me?" Margaret hesitated, then said, "You're not one of their cronies. You don't go to their barbecues or play golf with them. They see you as an outsider, even if you own land here." The words stung, but they made sense. Daniel had never been one to socialize with the HOA crowd. He preferred the solitude of his cabin, the sound of the river, the view of the mountains. He'd paid his dues on time, kept the property in order, and assumed that was enough. Clearly it wasn't. By May, Daniel still didn't have a key card. He'd taken to parking his truck at a pull-off near the bridge and hiking a mile to his cabin, carrying groceries and supplies on his back. It was inconvenient, but he wasn't about to let the HOA win. He started researching his options, pulling out the deed to his property and reading it carefully. The language was clear. He owned the bridge and the land it sat on, free and clear. The road itself was public, but it was inaccessible without crossing his bridge. He contacted a lawyer, Emily Torres, who specialized in property disputes. Emily reviewed the deed and confirmed what Daniel already knew. The HOA had no legal right to block his access, and he had significant leverage. You could sue them for restricting your access, Emily said during their first meeting. But you've got something even better. That bridge is your ace in the hole. If they want to play hardball, you can make things very difficult for them. Daniel wasn't ready to escalate yet. He wanted to give the HOA one last chance to do the right thing. He sent a formal letter, drafted by Emily, demanding immediate access to his property and citing his ownership of the bridge. He gave them a deadline, 1 week. If they didn't comply, he'd take further action. The deadline came and went. No key card. No response. Daniel's patience ran out. He called Emily and told her to move forward. "They're not listening," he said. "It's time to show them who they're dealing with." Emily filed a lawsuit against the HOA, alleging unlawful restriction of access to Daniel's property. But that was just the beginning. Daniel had another plan, one he'd been mulling over since the gate went up. He owned the bridge, and while he couldn't block the public road, he could control access to the bridge itself. He consulted with Emily, who confirmed that he had the right to restrict access to his private property as long as he followed proper legal procedures. On a sunny morning in June, Daniel drove to the bridge with a crew from his construction company. They unloaded equipment and set up a temporary barrier, a chain-link gate with a padlock, positioned at the entrance to the bridge. A sign read, "Private property. No access without permission of owner." Daniel stood by as his crew worked, watching cars approach, slow down, and turn around, confused. By noon, the bridge was effectively closed, cutting off the only road into Pinewood Estates. The reaction was immediate. Residents called the HOA in a panic, unable to get to their homes. Delivery trucks, maintenance workers, and visitors were turned away. By evening, Daniel's phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors, some pleading, others angry. He didn't respond. He'd given the HOA every chance to resolve this amicably. Now, they'd have to deal with the consequences. Callahan showed up at the bridge that afternoon, his face red with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Harper?" he demanded, gesturing at the gate. "You can't just block the road." "It's not the road," Daniel said calmly. "It's my bridge. I own it. Check the deed if you don't believe me." Callahan sputtered, clearly unprepared for this. This is outrageous. You're holding the entire community hostage. Daniel crosses arms. Funny. That's exactly what you did to me when you locked me out of my cabin. I asked for a key card. You ignored me. Now you know how it feels. Callahan stormed off, promising legal action. Daniel wasn't worried. He knew his rights, and he had Emily on his side. Over the next few days, the HOA scrambled to respond. They sent a cease and desist letter, claiming the bridge was part of the public right-of-way. Emily countered with a copy of the deed, along with a detailed history of the bridge's ownership, proving it was private property. The HOA's lawyer went quiet after that. Residents, meanwhile, were growing restless. Some tried to negotiate with Daniel directly, offering apologies and asking for access. Margaret, the neighbor who'd warned him about the HOA, brought him a plate of homemade brownies and said, "You're shaking things up, Daniel." About time someone stood up to Callahan. Others weren't so kind. Daniel received angry voicemails, accusing him of being selfish, of ruining the community. One resident, a lawyer named Greg Peterson, confronted him at the bridge, threatening to sue. "You can't just cut us off like this," Greg said. "We have rights." "So, do I," Daniel replied. "I asked for access to my property. Your HOA ignored me. Now you're feeling what I felt." The standoff lasted a week. Pinewood Estates was effectively cut off, with residents forced to park at the pull-off and walk or find alternate routes through neighboring properties, most of which were private and inaccessible. The local news picked up the story with a headline that read, "Mountain Man locks out gated community in bridge dispute." Reporters reached out to Daniel, but he declined interviews, letting Emily handle the media. She framed it as a case of an overreaching HOA violating a homeowner's rights, and public sentiment began to shift in Daniel's favor. Behind the scenes, Callahan and the HOA board were in chaos. They held an emergency meeting, which Daniel didn't attend, and voted to issue him a key card immediately. But Daniel wasn't ready to open the bridge just yet. He wanted more than access. He wanted accountability. He instructed Emily to demand a formal apology from the HOA, along with reimbursement for his legal fees and the cost of hiking to his cabin for weeks. He also wanted Callahan to step down as president. The HOA balked at first, but the pressure was mounting. Residents were furious, blaming the board for mishandling the situation. Some started questioning Callahan's leadership, digging into the HOA's finances and past decisions. What they found wasn't pretty. Questionable contracts, inflated fees, and a pattern of favoritism toward Callahan's allies. The bridge dispute had opened a Pandora's box, and Callahan was losing his grip. On June 15th, Daniel received a letter from the HOA, signed by Callahan and the entire board. It included a key card, a formal apology, and a check for $5,000 to cover his expenses. Callahan announced his resignation the same day, citing personal reasons. Daniel read the letter, satisfied but not surprised. He'd known the bridge was his leverage, but he hadn't expected the HOA to cave so quickly. He called Emily to discuss next steps. "They've met most of our demands," she said, "but you could push for more punitive damages, maybe, or changes to the HOA's bylaws." Daniel thought it over. He didn't want to drag this out forever. He'd made his point, and the community was already reeling. "Let's end it," he said. "I'll open the bridge, but I want it in writing that they'll never pull something like this again." Emily drafted an agreement, which the HOA signed without hesitation. It guaranteed Daniel's access to his property, prohibited any future restrictions without his consent, and acknowledged his ownership of the bridge. On June 20th, Daniel removed the gate, and traffic flowed into Pinewood Estates once more. Life didn't return to normal, though not entirely. The HOA elected a new president, a retired teacher named Linda Brooks, who promised transparency and fairness. Residents started treating Daniel differently, some with respect, others with wariness. He didn't care. He'd never been part of their social circle, and he didn't plan to start now. He did, however, make one change. He installed a small sign at the entrance to the bridge, visible to every car that crossed it. "Private property of Daniel Harper." It was a quiet reminder, not just to the HOA, but to anyone who thought they could control him. The bridge was his, and so was his peace. Daniel went back to his cabin, to his quiet evenings by the river, to the life he'd built. The HOA's gate was still there, but it didn't bother him anymore. He had his key card, his rights, and the satisfaction of knowing he'd stood his ground. The mountains were his home, and no one, not Callahan, not the HOA, not anyone, could take that away from him.